I have the same hormone levels and fat redistribution as any cisgender woman.
Listen, some women are 5'10". Therefore, I have the same height as some cis women. Therefore, I'm basically a cis woman.
I truly believe that the reason that trans people in sports is so contested, especially on the right, is that people who are transphobic genuinely have a belief that trans people don't have a right to exist.
I think someone here has never Googled fucking Florida man in their lives.
I don't know why people care. Not about trans people in sports, but just why people care about sports. Sorry, that's just anti-trans.
Yeah, we'll see what this is. Listen, trans sport, once again, it always comes back to this for some reason. Well, I know why. It's because it's one of the hot button issues. It's one of the things where your biological sex actually matters. Transgender people belong in sports. We will not be erased. Yeah, I'm going to guess the problem with this is going to be we're saying that we're being banned from sport in general when that's not the case. Trans women are being banned from women's sports specifically. And that there probably isn't going to be sufficient argumentation as to why trans women can't just go in with the males, apart from we've weakened ourselves using HRT, which, as harsh as it is to say, that's kind of a you problem, right?
Hello again, YouTube. It's Skylar. Welcome back to my face. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about trans people in sports. A topic that I have put off for a very long time and undoubtedly will cause no contention. Alright, before we get into it,
Self-aware, that's at least something.
Please remember to hit the like and subscribe button. It actually really does help my channel and get my message out to more people.
That's a good point. Are you subscribed? Are you watching me but you're not subscribed? Consider subscribing. Make sure you like the stream. Help me out in the algorithm. Anyway.
So if you could do...
Yeah, the hair flick. I don't see a huge amount of women doing that kind of thing, but hey, listen. Welcome back to my face. I don't know, you gotta say something. I don't even do introductions. Like, my videos just start at whatever point of the stream they start at, so.
Do that would be fantastic. Alright, so I've deliberated and thought about this topic for a very long time. And the conclusion that I've reached is I don't know why people care. Not about trans people in sports, but just why people care about sports.
This is not a good start, you have to understand. If you don't know why people care about this, why are you talking about it? Because that implies that you don't. And if you don't, that's fine. If someone's going to come up to you and say, hey, what do you think about trans women in sports? And you're like, I don't really care about sports. Then that's fine. What I do tend to find is that someone will say that and then offer a bunch of opinions anyway. Like, do one or the other, you know what I mean? So this isn't a great start. And it's very obvious why people care about this. Like, sport is a big industry. People make their careers off of this kind of thing. People enjoy it. It's a sense of community for people. At the higher end, it's, you know, we're testing people at their limits to see who is the best at this, that, and the other. Like, this is people's careers. Of course, they're going to care about it. It's like saying, why do you care about bartending? Well, it's like for some people, that's how they make their living, you know?
In general, of all the things in our society...
Like, in general, like, I don't know. They're from the US, I'm guessing. I don't know for sure. Like, listen, North American accent, whatever. Like, sport is a massive industry. People get, like, a free ride to college based on being good at a sport. In my country, you're good at kicking a ball around. You can make millions doing that. There's, like, huge amounts of economic activity. It's stuff that huge amounts of people are very passionate about. Like, it really isn't really worth... It really isn't worth even asking, why do people care about this? Obviously, lots of people do.
Society that we have to worry about, honestly, from my opinion, sports really isn't that big of a deal. It's people running around and scoring points, and it's all for entertainment.
I mean, we can deconstruct anything that way. Why is being trans such a big deal? It's just people filling their bodies with hormones and getting bits of themselves cut off. Like, why is that a rights thing? You know what I mean? We can break down anything enough to make it seem silly. I mean, you could take it the other way and say, let's take Olympic sprinting. What we're looking at is like the peak of like human performance in terms of like speed. You know what I mean? We can take it the other way and make it sound epic. Or we can take it the other way and make it sound, oh, it's just people running around. What's the big deal? You know what I mean? Try not to roll your eyes. Fair enough. Hi, Wolf Plague.
It's really, I'm not entirely sure what the fascination is. I'm also not sure how
I mean, I understand why it's a big deal in terms of like the trans question is because this kind of thing, oh, it says United States. You're right. That was literally on screen. What was I saying? Yeah, in terms of the trans question, again, it should be very obvious as to why it's a big deal when it comes to the trans question. It's because sport is one of those things where your sex actually matters. There's plenty of areas in society where your sex probably doesn't matter. And whether you're a male or female doing this, that, or the other probably has no bearing at all. And people probably shouldn't look at literally everything about you and like compare it to which sex you are. Plenty of the time, it makes no difference. Why does anyone care about anything? There we go. Yeah, you could do that anywhere. But like with sport, it does matter. And you're saying that people of the opposite sex, where one of them has an advantage over the other, should be going in with that disadvantaged sex. Like, if that's the case, there are conversations that need having. And if you just say, oh, well, who cares? Well, that's fine to say, but then why talk about it? People are going to talk about it because it does matter.
Trans rights and sports became the keystone for the trans rights debate. Of all the things that affect people, trans people in sports is probably the most minuscule effect of anything that trans people exist.
I mean, if this is the case, then what's the problem with banning them from female sports? Not really affecting many people, right? So who cares, you know?
Have an effect on anyone in society. So it really...
Like, if you have this position, it's fine. But if you're going to go on to then defend, you're saying trans people belong in sports. But you don't see why it's a big deal. You don't care. It's a minuscule issue. Well, then does it matter if they all get banned? Does it matter if the trans women have to go in the women's?
Strikes me as just bizarre that people would throw so much weight and attention behind this topic.
Okay, we've already dealt with this. Very, very obvious reasons as to why sport is one of the things that is a big conversation around transsexuality.
But because I'm trans and I have a trans YouTube channel, I knew eventually that I would need to talk about this topic. So here are my thoughts. Do I think that trans people should be in sports that align with their gender identity? Yes, I think that is 100% a civil liberties issue. I believe that we shouldn't discriminate based on gender identity in sports in much the same way that we...
Well, there's no discrimination based on gender identity because you can still compete with men if you're a male person. The problem is, gender identity has no bearing on anything. I mean, not only in general, but also in terms of sport. You have to consider sex.
Already don't do that in things like the workplace or employment or, government programs or anything to that sort. Those rules, for the most part, are, enshrined, and most companies do that on their own volition. They don't wait for the government. They actually just say, we're not going to discriminate against trans people because...
Well, I mean, in my country, you're not allowed to.
Because we know that's the right thing to do.
But then the problem is you sometimes get clashes, like the hiring quotas thing, where you can hire trans women instead of women. It still counts as hiring women. But then women are disadvantaged because they might go on maternity leave one day. And a company is not going to want to hire that person if instead they could hire someone that's never going to go on maternity leave because that person is going to stay in the job. That person is not going to need paying for not doing their job, Sports is about discriminatory as you can get. That's the entire point about it. Yeah. They really shouldn't discriminate against slow people in sprinting, you know what I mean? Why is it in the Olympics that they only let fast people do the sprinting? They should let more slow people do it as well.
But when it comes to trans people in sports, there seems to be this really weird narrative that somehow being trans gives you some sort of advantage.
Not being trans, being male, and that is indisputable. Oh man. we're already summing up the other arguments, the other side's arguments, wildly incorrectly. No one's saying being trans gives you an advantage. What they're saying is being male gives you an advantage. If you're male going into a female sport, there's a problem there. Whether you're trans or not doesn't actually matter. It's your sex that matters.
Now, being a trans person, having transitioned over a decade ago, I can tell you that outside of reducing gender dysphoria and feeling happy as my authentic self, being
What does it mean to be your authentic self?
trans has netted me zero benefit in any situation. Like I said, the only thing that being trans...
Like, but apparently you don't play nor care about sport, so how would you know whether you have an advantage in sport specifically, bearing in mind that's the topic? Oh, this is painful. This is actually painful.
helps with is reducing the gender dysphoria and allowing the person to just live as their authentic self. But this notion, this idea that somehow, despite all of the negative social consequences and connotations,
Well, yeah, but why don't they ever let the slower people win? It seems very unfair that the only people who are allowed to win at Olympic sprinting are the fast people, you know? I'm sorry, I'll stop.
and all of the societal stigma and propaganda about trans people,
Which comes from both sides, by the way.
the idea that somebody would transition just to have a slight advantage in a single area of life that is normally highly competitive and contested anyway is remarkably bizarre to me.
Do you not think that, like, human beings do far weirder things all the time than decide that they should transition because they love a sport, but they're not very good at it, so they want to see if they can make it in the other one? I agree, it's not very likely to happen. It probably doesn't happen often, like, at all. But at the same time, stranger things happen all the time, man. A guy died because he got fucked by a horse. Why the fuck would someone want to do that? I don't know, but someone did.
Because no person, sane or otherwise, would upend their entire life, go through the process of physical transition from one gender to the other, and risk ostracization and stigmatization by both their friends, families, and communities, and go through all of that discrimination just so that they could have a small perceived advantage in a single category of a very niche area of sports.
Okay, sure. I don't know. This is based on nothing.
Now, I don't usually use the term Occam's razor because I feel like it's overused. But I think in this scenario, I think most people can see how ludicrous that sounds.
Yeah, but you can't just say, oh, well, Occam's razor, therefore no males would ever transition to get an advantage. You don't know what some people will do. There are some crazy fucking people out there. I don't know why you're putting anything past human beings at this point. I think someone here has never Googled fucking Florida man in their lives.
Now, being trans, for me, is wonderful and amazing, and I love being trans, and trans positivity
I'm so sorry, I don't know why it's lagging so much.
is wonderful and amazing, and I love being trans, and trans positivity is something I feel we should have more of in society, and trans people should be celebrated for who they are, and
Why should anyone be celebrated just for being who they are? Should I be celebrated for being white? Should my partner be celebrated for being from the south of the UK? Like, why? Why do you want celebrating for the fact that you exist?
that celebrate diversity in general, overall, of every
Or maybe it is the video, I don't know. Listen, I'm sorry if the lag is ruining the viewing experience.
everybody's gender identity and diversity across the board everywhere. But
Like, why should any of that be celebrated? I think people should be hated for that kind of thing, so long as they're not stepping on other people's toes, which is where the trans movement is kind of falling down at the moment, because they are stepping on people's toes. But why should it be celebrated? Why are you special because you have a gender identity? Why am I special because I'm white, you know?
I think it goes without saying, which is why I didn't want to make this video for the longest time, that we need to have a conversation about this. If you really wanted to talk about this in a serious manner beyond that, you're talking about something that's so nuanced.
Okay, I'm gonna try refreshing, because this is like, I can't tell if the video, I can't tell if my computer is lagging for some reason.
And that celebrate diversity in general, overall.
Okay, I think it is the video. Listen, we're just gonna power through, it's fine.
Of everybody's gender identity and diversity across the board everywhere. But I think it goes without saying, which is why I didn't want to make this video for the longest time, that we need to have a conversation about this.
Listen, I'd love to have more conversations about this kind of thing. It's just that my inbox isn't exactly filling up with people that disagree with me on transport. I'd love to have more conversations. I'll talk to this person, absolutely. I think they're very misguided on this issue myself.
If you really wanted to talk about this in a serious manner beyond that, you're talking about something that's so nuanced that you're literally talking about specific examples of individual people.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, yeah, there's nuance, but at the same time, the general and broad point is that in general, a male is stronger, bigger, more geared up towards certain physical activities than a female. And in most sports, that pans out as men perform better than women. And you have to acknowledge, like, your birth sex. Identifying as something does not change your material reality.
The process of physical transition is exactly what it sounds like. It's physical transition. I have the same hormone levels and fat redistribution as any cisgender woman.
Okay, hang on a sec. This is a really nuanced issue, yeah? Then you're going to say, I have exactly the same hormonal profile as the cis one. Based on what? Have you compared, like, your hormone levels to, like, cis people? Even if it is, why does that mean that there's no leg to stand on when it comes to banning trans women from women's sports? Like, how are you going to say it's all nuanced and then make a massive generalization like that?
It does. I personally, if I was to go compete in sports, I know I wouldn't win.
Yeah, if you're not an athlete, yeah, that's probably the case. I'm not actually in amazing shape. I'm not all that fit. There are probably lots of women that would win in a race against me because I haven't trained, like, at all whatsoever.
I mean, the most exercise that I've gotten in the past couple months.
I bet this is a nice person who just sounds naive and misguided. Hey, maybe, listen, I hope I'm not making, like, personal judgments on this person beyond that. I do think they're extremely misguided, like, Jesus Christ. The problem is we've been listening to people that don't have a fucking clue. And you start regurgitating those things. You're kind of fucking yourself, unfortunately.
This is just going for a walk. And this is really the crux of what I want to talk about.
Listen, some women are 5'10". Therefore, I have the same height as some cis women. Therefore, I'm basically a cis woman.
About is, what is it that people are really upset about here?
Well, when it comes to sport, they're talking about people with advantages coming into disadvantaged people's sport. You can't just say, well, what are you actually talking about? Well, they're talking about sport.
Are they upset because of some perceived advantage /
Yes, literally.
disadvantage of one small group of people? That I truly believe that the reason that trans people in sports is so contested, especially on the right, is that people who are transphobic genuinely have a belief that trans people don't have a right to exist.
Oh my fucking... Oh, it's such a nuanced issue. By the way, here's the most retarded fucking trans rights activist talking point ever. Mate, it's not about that some people on the right don't think you should exist. You're skipping over every single argument without even dealing with any of them to go on to a different argument that's got nothing to do with sport. You can't do that without dealing with all the other arguments first and heading them off. Why are the actual specific arguments bad if you're going to then make a different argument that's more broad and more about a different societal thing. You can't just skip all the arguments and then do that. It doesn't work. It just makes you sound dishonest. Makes it sound like literally you've just been listening to like some TRA dipshits that don't know what they're talking about and probably care about sport about as much as you do.
And by excluding them from one of what's considered the most tribalistic aspect of society.
Well, if sport isn't that important, why would they pick sport? You know what I mean? Why aren't they going for like, oh, trans people shouldn't be allowed into like colleges or something? Like, why is that? Is it because they can make the case that males have an advantage over females? Well, if males can have an advantage over females, then why are they in women's sports? Everything is made a factual-based argument. Yeah, we've already skipped over any possible argument and gone straight to the, well, it's a conspiracy because they're trying to get rid of us. You have to make all the other arguments first. You have to show why none of the things they're actually saying hold water. What are they actually saying? We never get any like fair approximations of the arguments against trans women in sports before we then write everything off. He thinks anatomy is hormone. Yeah, all we've done is say, well, my hormones are similar to a cis. Like, even if they are, let's say they are, does that mean there's no way you can be stronger? In many ways, have like a different physiology because you're a male that might advantage you? Hormones are like just one part of the picture, man.
People get very caught up in sports regardless of whether it's trans or not. I don't see the appeal myself. I'm all for exercise and everything, but some people go so deep into sports that, it's just like, whoa.
Yeah, it's a massive deal to a lot of people. So when you're like compromising the fairness of it, especially when it's like their family that might be competing and then they lose out to a male, that's gonna affect people. It doesn't affect you personally. So I guess you can... What am I watching? Guessing needs validation. Yeah. Well, it's all about validation. You have to validate trans people, otherwise you're capitulating to the right who want trans people not to exist. Who's even saying that? You have to write off the arguments they are making before you can start speculating what their real motives are. It doesn't work to do it the other way round. You just sound like a conspiracy theorist.
I'm sure they have their reason, and, I have my hobbies too. But to talk about this issue...
What does this person do for a job? I should ask them why anyone should care about the thing that they do for a job.
Really comes down to the core, I think, of transphobia, which is by allowing trans people to compete in sports.
Well, they are allowed to compete in sports. I knew it. Belong in sports. You're acting like it's a blanket ban on any sport when actually you're still allowed to compete with men. It's just that you're probably not going to do very well. Because HRT does remove your strength advantage to a certain extent. Just the research I've seen suggests that it doesn't do so fully. And that there are other factors that the HRT does nothing for, like wingspan and like lung capacity and stuff.
There is this preconceived conception that they seem to be thinking that, well, I'm condoning trans people existing, or trans people are allowed to exist in society.
Like, how do we get here when we haven't even dealt with the subject even a little?
And so the knee-jerk reaction to that is, we'll just ban them from sports. I've even heard some arguments of creating...
I don't want trans people to exist. What can we do? Murder all of them? Nah, let's just ban them from sports. Oh, I know. We could just make all their healthcare illegal. Nah, sports. Ban them from sports. That'll show them. That'll show them. Yeah.
A third gender sport, which I'm not even going to go into because that just sounds silly to me. But
why is it silly? We're not even bothering entertaining arguments anymore. Why isn't that a good compromise? I mean, I can answer that to an extent. There's not that many trans athletes. So you might not really have enough to make it a competition. And then you'd still have to like separate like trans men and trans women. Trans men would be especially complicated because they're all on T. Are they on different levels of T depending on what level they should be at for various reasons. Does that mean some will have more advantage than others because they're all juicing? I don't know. If you mix in trans men and trans women, most likely the trans women are gonna still have the advantage. Like, from what I understand, I think trans men tend to be stronger than trans women, than regular women. And I think trans women's strength advantage doesn't normally come down enough to meet in the middle with trans men. So you might end up making just another male sports category where all the trans women dominate. But it's going to depend on the sport. There's going to be some sports. I mean, it's the odd one that if there's no real advantage between the sexes, then maybe the trans people should be able to go in there. I don't know, but I don't know. We're so far off track by now. We've not even touched on the issue. The main argument here has been, I don't care. Then why talk about it?
It's this concept of the foot in the door argument where if we can use sports as leverage to ban trans people, we now have an argument to base off of how we can ban trans people from other aspects of society.
And the other thing is, you're pinning this on the right. Well, what about all the non-right-wing people that also don't support trans women in sports? Bearing in mind it's a wildly unpopular thing, you know? It's not a popular policy for, like, any, like, political party to pursue.
Society. Once you start going down that rabbit hole of this group of people is not allowed in this area, this group of people is not allowed in that area, then you start to open the door for discrimination to happen at all levels for all people. We
can't have women-specific sports because then it might encourage other kinds of discrimination. So we're just fucking women over. Like, so women can just go fuck themselves. You're a woman who wants to participate in sports and was hoping that they would be able to participate in a sport that is fair and where you're going up against other women, bearing in mind there is a separate men's sports. Too fucking bad. If we don't allow this, then other discrimination might happen. Bizarre. I don't think this person knows that there's left-wing people who oppose men and women's sports. Probably not, no. There's certainly a level of ignorance on show, unfortunately.
We shouldn't get caught up in this debate. And honestly, I still think it's odd that...
Yeah, so why does it keep biting women specifically in the ass? Why is it women's sports that have to be sacrificed so that trans people aren't discriminated against? Why is it women's spaces in diversity quotas that have to be sacrificed so that trans people aren't discriminated against? Why is it always women that end up getting fucked around with, you know?
People are still even contesting this in the first place. But yeah, because that's another thing, is that for some strange reason, the conversation always revolves around transgender women.
Yes, because trans women are male. Males have advantages in terms of strength, speed, etc. over women. Therefore, trans women coming into women's sport is where the problem lies. Like, this person knows nothing about sport, so they can't name any trans men that have come into men's sport and done well. The only one I know off the top of my head is that Chris Mosier. And the sports that he was doing well in, first of all, it was an over 35 category, I think it was. And second of all, it was like triathlon and race walking and stuff. Endurance sport, where women and men, like the difference is not as much there. Like long distance running, like endurance sport and stuff like that. Men don't have as much of an advantage. Whereas when it comes to like explosive power and strength and stuff like that, things where your stature, your height, etc., wingspan matter, men do have an advantage.
Never, ever, ever is brought up that trans men exist, female to male.
Well, I literally acknowledge their existence all the time. And there's just not very many of them coming into men's sports and doing well.
You do realize that if making trans people compete in the gender that they used to be, you would have trans men who are on testosterone with muscular fatigues and playing in women's sports. But somehow the argument is we want to keep men out of women's sports. So
now we start talking about the arguments, when instead earlier you're like, Well, what's it really about? Actually, it's about erasing trans people. Like, now you're going to make this argument? Like, why not bring this up earlier?
I'm just trying to find the logic in what they're trying to advocate for. And at the end of the day, all I can see is it just comes down to basic transphobia. We don't like trans people. What can we do to, push them down? And that's all it is. That's all this topic is basically about. And I'm not going to entertain that. Trans people are people. Trans rights are human rights. Being trans is not something that you do.
Oh, when all else fails. When all else fails. Thought terminating cliche. Well, trans women are women. Trans rights are human rights. Those aren't arguments, bro.
It's something that you are. And being trans is something that is inherent to the human condition. So we shouldn't discriminate against people for something they have no control over. And again, the physiological differences, you're going into the nuance of, well, is this amount of hormone level higher, or is this type of fat redistribution on the body? Like, it's so nuanced.
It's so nuanced. So let's not talk about it and just say that it's transphobia. That's like cowardly. That's cowardly, man. You can't do it that way. You have to get into that because that's what it's about. It's about the differences between men and women. If you're not willing to do that, why are you talking about this issue, frankly?
How do you, what about cisgender women who have high levels of testosterone? Most trans women have low levels of testosterone. So, and then, trans men in women's sports, because that's the logical conclusion of this argument, if they're not just outright saying we just want to ban all trans people from sports, period.
No one is saying all trans people. What is going on?
So, and then, trans men in women's sports, because that's the logical conclusion of this argument, if they're not just outright saying we just want to ban all trans people from sports, period. There's no argument. It just makes sense.
There's no argument. I haven't listened to any arguments. I haven't brought up a video explaining the other perspective to then argue against. I haven't got a list here of why people think that men shouldn't be in women's sports, but they've got no arguments. You don't know any of the arguments, and you don't care. So why are you doing this?
Sense to just have people compete with their gender identity. It is conducive to a society based on compassion and understanding for those around them, to include people from different walks of life. And trans people are some of those people. So, again, I probably am not going to bring up this topic again because it's...
Thank fuck for that, Jesus. Once was more than enough.
It's just really weird to talk about because of the things that I just explained. I would much rather focus my attention on talking about, access to healthcare or,
Yeah, the logical conclusion stuff. We just write everything off and then say, oh, well, the only logical conclusion based on me ignoring all the actual points is that it's all about transphobia. Just fuel the persecution complex again. You're not persecuted, bro. I'm sorry.
Civil liberties in employment or things of that nature. Sports just doesn't... Yes, that is my position, is that trans people should compete in sports.
I mean, anyone sane agrees with you. They just don't think... they don't think that trans women should be in women's sports. How can none of these people ever engage with this subject, honestly? Why is it always, oh, you're trying to ban trans people from all sport? No one is saying that. It doesn't make any sense. You can go in the men's. You probably won't do very well because you're hampering yourself by taking certain hormones and reducing other hormones. But you're making a point that no one is actually making. Why does the audio seem out of sync with the video? Because the audio is out of sync with the video. I don't know why it's like this. Must be maybe it's a rendering issue. Couldn't tell you.
But I just wish we could move away.
I think it's a good representation between the words coming out of this person's mouth and their connection to reality is the disconnect between what's on screen and what's in my ears.
Away from that topic because it just seems so irrelevant to the rest of the conversation. And I think it's just an emotional reaction from people who are, quite frankly, just...
How are you going to say that when, again, all you've done is say, oh, well, the issues are nuanced. It must be transphobia. Like, no, you still have to deal with the issues. Just because they're nuanced, just because they're complicated, just because it's about microcosms of fucking human biology and how men and women differ. Like, just because you're too lazy to get into any of that and actually understand the arguments, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have to have those arguments first before concluding that it's about transphobia. That's doing a massive disservice to people that actually do care about this shit.
Misinformed and miseducated about trans people and trans topics. So
how can you say that when you're clearly like very, very ignorant about this topic? The actual topic of the video.
With that said, if you enjoy my content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing videos. And I also have a Patreon down in the description.
I'm just going to let that slide. Yeah, okay, amazing. That's exactly what I would have said.
Below. Again, it's just for people who...
I was looking forward to some science-based pushback. Well, they've got a trans pride flag here, and they're a trans person. You thought there was going to be any science-based pushback to what is a very science-based issue, then I've got news for you.
Would want to contribute to me. I do plan on making a exclusive members-only content.
Maybe I should do that more often. Look. Hang on. Sorry, I hit my mic. There you go. Did I do it?
Here shortly. So any help from that would be really helpful. But again, no pressure. It's just there for those who would like to support me that way. Also, anybody that didn't get a chance to see my recent post, I am in the process of editing my book. So the book has been written, and now I'm just editing it, and then it'll be published shortly thereafter. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be drinking a lot of coffee because I'd like to get this done as soon as possible. And with that said, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and take care. Bye.
Fat distribution, yeah. I'm like baffled. I don't know why I still am. None of these ever deal with anything real. But we're telling the world how it should be. You're telling people that you should let men into women's spaces, into women's sports, with no actual reason as to why that is. Any guesses what the book is about? Themselves, I'm guessing. Brains rots, human rights. One struggle, one fight. I mean, hey, they're quite prolific. Listen. Wow, 7 years ago. What they looked like before. Interesting. Glad they switched it up. I think the natural hair is a bit better than this wig, I would say. An old channel. I think did they take a break? 7 years. 7 years. Yeah. 6 years ago. 3 months ago. And spirituality. Okay, well that was utterly crazy. I don't know what I was expecting.